Hello, everybody. This is Justy again, back with you with another of our three-part series, giving you more information about me and my background, where I come from, both mentally and physically. And the second part of what will be a three-part series um, that gives my viewers that basic information about me and my background. In this part, uh, we'll be looking at my young adulthood as I coped with best I could being a transgender person who really was not able or allowed by society to express who I was. So, and the damage that that caused as a result of mainly basic dishonesty on my part that I felt pressured into at the time. So in the last one, I ended off at age 20, but we really need to back it up a little bit this time, and we need to look at age 19 a little bit closer because something happened at that time that really kind of set up the events of the next period of time in my life after that. So in my 19th year, I just happened across a really good opportunity, which got me basically off of living on the street and got me 3 square meals a day, a good job. And what happened was that I hooked up with a circus that tours the whole country of the United States. And I was with that tour for over a year. And while with them, uh, I was able to um, do a job that was very physically demanding and in an atmosphere where I had to live in very close quarters with a lot of other men and all doing the same job I was doing, which was very physically demanding type of job, labor job. And so uh, it was what I would say would be a very heteronormative atmosphere. Um, but being in the circus, um, there definitely was a but there because while it appeared on the surface to be heteronormative uh, atmosphere, actually what was occurring there was that people just didn't nose into each other's business. So things occurred while I was there. I was able to express myself to a degree while I was working for the circus. And it just wasn't talked about, that's all. Nobody bothered me. I was good at my job and got along well with my coworkers. And so they never brought it up. I mean, I'm sure that some of them were aware of my activities in terms of my sexuality, as I did identify as bisexual, although at the time not openly. And so that meant that I had experiences in that during that time where that were not heteronormative. But however, for the most of the time, I appeared on the surface to be as straight as a person could ever be. And no one that I didn't want to know would know. If I didn't want someone to know, then I made sure that they didn't know. And I did that by becoming very good at the longer I was with the circus, that becoming very good at hiding different aspects of my personality, including my sexuality. Uh, I also dated girls, and so it wasn't difficult at all for my coworkers to think or believe that I was just a heterosexual guy. And because of the nature of the job, in which the longer I was there, the more muscular I became and more healthy and fit I became, uh, it was easier and easier for people to believe that of me. And I had, for the time that I was there, I had put aside, um, repressed would be a good word for it, my feminine uh, qualities, and in terms of any outward expression of those qualities. I was learning from the other young men that I worked with uh, how young men that are adults interact with one another and how they act. And therefore, what I was doing was I was getting a class in how to fit in. And so that's what was going on while I was with the circus. And for me, because of the way I was, when I left the circus, it became a very damaging thing for me to have this ability to portray myself as being a completely heterosexual, heteronormative person, particularly since shortly after I left the circus, I met a woman. And this young woman I fell in love with immediately, was infatuated with, and of course, I didn't tell her a thing. And um, I was working in a job where we both were working in that job at the time, and no one in that job knew. And I knew that if they did know, they would probably not respect me in the way they did. And of course, by this time, having left the circus after a year and a half, and having trained as a trapeze artist while I was with the circus, no less, I was extremely muscular and extremely healthy at that point. And this is, age 20, 21. So, uh, it was after I left that circus program. So I met this gal. When we got together, I never told her about my past or about myself. And I had become, while with the circus and with some of my experiences during my teenage years, um, very good at portraying myself as a heterosexual male. And I knew from her background, her family's background, that if anything else were known besides that by her or by any of our coworkers at that job, that that probably would be the end of the relationship. That she probably would not have. I mean, I don't know. I never will know. But I don't think that she would have, you know, accepted me as she knew uh, really who I was, in particular when it came to my gender. But I was doing a pretty good job of forgetting conveniently um, about that side of my life. I've been kept away from that side of my life for a couple of years, a little more than that actually, as I spent that time living on the beach in Florida and uh, sorry, my nose itches. And Um, that during that period of time, I didn't have any opportunity to express outwardly my gender issues either. So for quite some time, I had not been able to go there, and so that meant that I hadn't engaged in any kind of cross dressing or any kind of expression of my femininity, except for what I would learn many years later was my sexual activity. At the time, um, I realize now, many years later, that my activity with other men was almost always a way for me to express my feminine side uh, in my sexuality. So, in other words, basically, the reason why I never had any long-term relationships or relationships that really worked out very well with other men as a young man was because I was not really interested in relationships with them. I was interested in the opportunity to express myself as and the female side of myself. And so I did that through my sexual activity, and I didn't even know that that's what I was doing at the time, but it's something I realized years later. So anyhow, this gal and I, we proceeded to have over a period of 4 years, 5 children. Because I didn't, being bisexual, no problem with being with a woman. You know, in fact, I have found over my lifetime that I prefer women quite a bit, mainly because that uh, made it to where my gender was now not my problem. It was, I mean, it was my problem, but it was also a wife's problem, and would become my children's problem, and to some degree still is today. Uh, and I'll explain further in the next episode on that. But for now, I'll just say that I didn't tell my spouse. I would never have married because I did know myself and I knew that that was probably not a good idea. But uh, we were very, very poor at the time that her family and their church came along and basically pressured us into marrying because we had found that she was pregnant, and it was winter. We were not doing well at all. We were going hungry and we were getting cold, and they were offering a job for me, and a good job. I had lost the job we were with. We had both lost the job we were with when we met. And so they were offering, a good paying job where I could support my, my new wife to be. At that time, we were not yet married, but they were pressuring us to be married. And they gave us an ultimatum basically by saying, well, we'll fix your problem for you in terms of your finances and your lack of food if you will agree to separate, live separately, and then agree to get married after having marriage counseling with our pastor. So this is what happened that caused us to get married was we were basically pressured into it. And we were both too young, and looking back, I think we probably both knew, or I don't know if we knew at the time, but we knew not too long after that probably wasn't a very good idea for either one of us for various reasons, meaning different reasons for her than for me. But for me, definitely not a good idea. And I knew that going in, but I also knew that I needed to put food on our table somehow, and that we had at least one child coming. and I needed to provide for that child too. And so I agreed to this, and we did go ahead and get married and had the support of this church and her family um, because of that. Um, and that's what enabled me to support a family and to bring more children into the world. And I don't regret that one bit. I love my children very much to this day, every one of them. And I'm, I, I'm so glad that I had that gift given to me during that time. But for myself and my, at the time, spouse, uh, it would turn out to be a pretty big disaster, and for the children as well as the years went by, because our relationship ended uh, after the birth happened. I was devastated. I that nearly brought me to another suicidal episode. I didn't eat. I hid away from everybody I knew. I was living in a converted school bus and converted into a motorhome. And I was able to move that vehicle to a place where nobody knew where it was. And that's where I stayed. And it wasn't plugged in or anything, but I wasn't eating. And I was actually slowly dying, um, literally, because I didn't care to continue the loss of my spouse and my children. That was the biggest part of it. Knowing that I was not going to be able to be in daily contact with my children. I didn't feel like I had anything to continue for. I knew that I had not been honest with my spouse, and that that had played somewhat of a role, although mostly it was other pressures that caused the breakup. But to some degree, anyway, I think that my uh, desire to have a wider experience, shall we say, than a heteronormative one, um, probably contributed to that to some degree, not too much. So eventually, some friends of mine found me, and uh, they knew what had happened, and they basically picked me up by the scruff of the collar and dragged me off to a place where I would be safe. And I moved in with them and was able to be safe. And they gave me, and really without much choice in the matter, it made me realize that I really had to move on. And so I started slowly trying to do that. And when I did, and that relationship was over, almost immediately, I came out to my friends as bisexual. And that was not the whole story by any means, but it was as far as I was willing to go at the time with all of my friends. Now, there were some of my friends after that relationship ended that knew about me, and knew about all the aspects of me and who Justy is, and they knew Justy, not my old name, which I'm not going to say here. Some people know it. Anyhow, um, so I began not too long after that. Uh, I began living uh, as Justy, um, part-time. I still had to work, and uh, even though I resided in Seattle, Washington, um, it was still the kind of work I was doing at the time, which was hardwood floors, very physical work, and it was not really the kind of job where you could be open about, certainly not, well, I mean, I didn't feel that I could be open about a gender issue in that job. And so, you know, basically I could live as myself on the weekends, and I had a small group of friends who knew who I was and what the situation was with me in terms of being trans. But they didn't have, none of us had the terminology for it at the time. Um, or if we did, I don't remember it. Maybe I just didn't have the terminology. Maybe some of my friends did. I don't know. But I didn't have the terminology for it. I just knew that I had this very strong, at the time, what I was calling a female side. And I was calling it that as part of my self deception in order to not have to, actually be myself full time and put at risk relationships with friends, my job, etc., etc. Society's ire. That's what I was trying to avoid, uh, even in that area of the country. At that time, this was in the early 90s. By that time, years after, a couple years after that relationship ended. And what I want to point out is that by not being open and honest with my spouse, that I'm no longer with at this point, uh, that made it to where that relationship really never had a chance, and that as a result, I had 5 children who didn't have a father, and they ended up with a stepfather, and I gather that didn't go so well for them. Well, I know it didn't, and uh, I, I can't help but uh, see myself as partly to blame for that, because it was my absence that was the reason for their distress in a great part, and it was my lack of honesty. So what I'm trying to get across here is that for someone who's transgender to continue to hide that from those closest to them, get involved in a relationship, for goodness sake, without disclosing any of the past that I revealed in my previous video in this series, was a huge mistake, and eventually became extremely hurtful to an awful lot of people. And so that, I want people to know that when if you're transgender, you're a young person, a young adult, teenager, whatever you may be, and society you feel is pressuring you to not reveal who you are, don't get involved in a marriage, for crying out loud, like I did, like an idiot, and don't have kids. I mean, I love my kids, and I'm glad I had them, but if you're transgendered, you need to deal with your gender issues before you go ahead and have family, so that family that you do eventually have, if you are interested in having family, they will know you for who you are from the get-go. And that is so much better of a situation than it is for your grown children to have to learn that you're transgendered and you're attempting to change your gender way later on in life, such as I have. It is a disaster. And that is the main thing I want to get across in telling this story about my children and my spouse at the time. And the thing is, I didn't learn my lesson from any of this. because I would get involved in another relationship eventually down the line. But first off, something occurred in 1992 that my family is well aware of and those that know me. And that is that I was involved in a trauma. And that trauma caused me to suffer a broken neck and many other injuries. And so that left me hospitalized, of course, and then into rehab, inpatient rehab for many months, and a long period of time where I was unable to move at all from the upper chest down. And it was a miracle, really, that I was eventually able to walk again. And that's another story for another time. Maybe we can talk about that sometime, but that's kind of off subject, except to say that when that injury occurred, I really got a new perspective on what it is to be a human being, what it is to be alive, and I uh, realized the value of my life. And as a result, I began to transition into female at that point using hormones. And so that was my first attempt, was right after my injury. My closest friends were aware that one of those friends was supplying me with medicines from their doctor illegally. But anyhow, that was what was going on at that time. Now, not long after that, uh, my disability had some new facets to it with what's called nerve regeneration or neural regeneration, which involves severe pain and involuntary muscle movement, uncontrollable, and that put a stop to my being able to transition at that time, and really would end up being a stop to it for quite some time. So I think we'll leave it there because we're now up to almost 30 minutes on this video. But we'll pick up there. I ended up having to leave the state of Washington as a result of those complications of my disability, and I had to stop my transition. And I ended up in Texas. And so that was a completely different social situation, to say the least. Anyhow, we'll pick it up there next time and bring it up to present day, and then you will know basically my background, but more importantly, uh, some of the reasons why, and there are more to come. Some of the reasons why it is a big mistake to not be honest with those around you in almost every situation, in the long term especially. And these are some of the things that go into why a person can end up having to wait until so late in life, as I have, to transition into the gender that they were born as up here. So you all have a great day, and thank you for hanging with me for so long. Bye-bye.